Day 4, Nairobi, June 16th, 1979. 1. Timeline. It was farther across Africa from Tangier to Nairobi than it was across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to London, 3,600 miles, an 8-hour flight. Ross spent the time at the computer console, working out what she called hyperspace probability lines. The screen showed a computer-generated map of Africa, with striking multicolored lines across it. These are all timelines, Ross said. We can weight them for duration and delay factors. Beneath the screen was a totally elapsed time clock, which kept shifting numbers. What's that mean? Elliot asked. The computer's picking the fastest route. You see, it's just identified a timeline that will get us on site in 6 days, 18 hours, and 51 minutes. Now it's trying to beat that time. Elliot had to smile. The idea of a computer predicting to the minute when they would reach their Congo location seemed ludicrous to him, but Ross was totally serious. As they watched, the computer clock shifted to 5 days, 22 hours, 24 minutes. Better, Ross said, nodding, but still not very good. She pressed another button, and the lines shifted, stretching like rubber bands over the African continent. This is the consortium route, she said, based on our assumptions about the expeditions. They're going in big, 30 or more people, a full-scale undertaking, and they don't know the exact location of the city. At least, we don't think they know. But they have a substantial start on us. At least 12 hours since their aircraft is already forming up in Nairobi. The clock registered total elapsed time 5 days, 9 hours, 19 minutes. Then she pressed a button marked date and it shifted to 6/21/79/08/14. According to this, the consortiums will reach the Congo site a little after 8 o'clock in the morning of June 21st. The computer clicked quietly. The lines continued to stretch and pull, and the clock read a new date, 6/21/79/12/24. Well, she said, that's where we are now. Given maximum favorability movements for us and them, the consortium will beat us to the site by slightly more than 4 hours, 5 days from now. Monroe walked past eating a sandwich. Better luck and another path, he said, or go radical. I hesitated. To go radical with the ape? Monroe shrugged. Have to do something with a timeline like that. Elliot listened to them with a vague sense of unreality. They were discussing a difference of hours, 5 days in the future. But surely, Elliot said, over the next few days, with all the arrangements at Nairobi, and then getting into the jungle, you can't put too much faith in those figures. This isn't like the old days of African exploration, Ross said, where parties disappeared into the wilds for months at most. The computer is off by minutes, say, roughly half an hour in the total 5 days projection. She shook her head. No, we have a problem here, and we've got to do something about it. The stakes are too great. You mean the diamonds. She nodded and pointed to the bottom of the screen, where the words blue contract appeared. He asked her what the blue contract was. One hell of a lot of money, Ross said, and she added, I think, for in truth, she did not really know. Each new contract at Ertz was given a code name. Only Travis and the computer knew the name of the company buying the contract. Everyone else at Ertz, from computer programmers to field personnel, knew the projects only by their color code names. Red contract, yellow contract, white contract. This was a business protected for the firms involved, but the Ertz mathematicians could not resist a lively guessing game about contract sources, which was the staple of daily conversation in the company canteen. The blue contract had come to Ertz in December 1978. It called for Ertz to locate a natural source of industrial-grade diamonds in a friendly or neutralist country. The diamonds were to be type 2B, nitrogen poor crystals. No dimensions were specified, so crystal size did not matter, nor were recoverable. Quantities specified. The contractor would take what he could get, and most unusual, there was no UECL. Nearly all contracts arrived with a unit extraction cost limit. It was not enough to find a mineral source. The minerals had to be extractable at a specified unit cost. This unit cost in turn reflected the richness of the ore body, its remoteness, the availability of local labor, political conditions, the possible need to build airfields, roads, hospitals, mines, or refineries. For a contract to come in without a UECL meant only one thing. Somebody wanted blue diamonds so badly he didn't care what they cost. Within 48 hours, the Ertz canteen had explained the blue contract. It turned out that type 2B diamonds were blue from trace quantities of the element boron, which rendered them worthless as gemstones, but altered their electronic properties, making them semiconductors with a resistivity on the order of 100 ohms centimeters. They also had light transmissive properties. Someone then found a brief article in Electronic News for November 17th, 1978. McPhee doping dropped. It explained that the Waltham, Massachusetts firm of Silac Inc. had abandoned the experimental McPhee technique to dope diamonds artificially with a monolayer boron coating. The McPhee process had been abandoned as too expensive and too unreliable to produce desirable semiconducting properties. The article concluded that other firms have underestimated problems in boron monolayer doping. Hagamichi Tokyo abandoned the Nagura process in September of this year. Looking backward, the Ertz canteen fitted additional pieces of the puzzle into place. Back in 1971, Intech, the Santa Clara microelectronics firm, had first predicted that diamond semiconductors would be important to a future generation of superconducting computers in the 1980s. The first generation of electronic computers, ENIAC and UNIVAC, built in the wartime secrecy of the 1940s, employed vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes had an average lifespan of 20 hours, but with thousands of glowing hot tubes in a single machine, some computers shut down every 7 to 12 minutes. Vacuum tube technology imposed a limit on the size and power of planned second-generation computers. But the second generation never used vacuum tubes. In 1947, the innovation of the transistor, a thumbnail-sized sandwich of solid material, which performed all the functions of a vacuum tube, ushered in an era of solid-state electronic devices, which drew little power, generated little heat, and was smaller and more reliable than the tubes they replaced. Silicon technology provided the basis for three generations of increasingly compact, reliable, and cheap computers over the next 20 years. But by the 1970s, computer designers began to confront the inherent limitations of silicon technology. Although circuits had been shrunk to microscopic dimensions, computation speed was still dependent on circuit length. To miniaturized circuits still more, where distance were already on the order of millionths of an inch, brought back an old problem: heat. Smaller circuits would literally melt from the innate heat and reduce resistance at the same time. It had been known since the 1950s that many metals, when cooled to extremely low temperatures, became superconducting, permitting the unimpeded flow of electrons through them. In 1977, IBM announced it was designing an ultra-high-speed computer the size of a grapefruit, filled with liquid nitrogen. The superconducting computer required a radically new technology and a new range of low-temperature construction materials. Doped diamonds would be used extensively throughout. Several days later, the Earth-Scan team came up with an alternative explanation. According to the new theory, the 1970s had been a decade of unprecedented growth in computers. Although the first computer manufacturers in the 1940s had predicted that 4 computers would do the computing work of the entire world for the foreseeable future, experts anticipated that by 1990 there would actually be 1 billion computers, most of them linked by communications networks to other computers. Such networks didn't exist and might even be theoretically impossible. A 1975 study by the Hanover Institute concluded there was insufficient metal in the Earth's crust to construct the necessary computer transmission lines. According to Harvey Rumbaugh, the 1980s would be characterized by a critical shortage of computer data transmission systems, just as the fossil fuel shortage took the industrialized world by surprise in the 1970s. So will the data transmission shortage take the world by surprise in the next 10 years. People people were denied movement in the 1970s, but they will be denied information in the 1980s, and it remains to be seen which shortage will prove more frustrating. Laser light represented the only hope for handling these massive data requirements, since laser channels carried 20,000 times the information of an ordinary metal coaxial trunk line. Laser transmissions demanded whole new technologies, including thin-spun fiber optics and doped semiconducting diamonds, which Rumbaugh predicted would be more valuable than oil in the coming years. Even further, Rumbaugh anticipated that within 10 years, electricity itself would become obsolete. Future computers would utilize only light circuits and interface with light transmission data systems. The reason was speed. Light, Rumbaugh said, moves at the speed of light. Electricity doesn't. We are living in the final years of microelectronic technology. Certainly, microelectronics did not look like a moribund technology in 1979. Microelectronics was a majority industry throughout the industrialized world, accounting for $80 billion annually. In the United States alone, 6 of the top 20 corporations in the Fortune 500 were deeply involved in microelectronics. These companies had a history of extraordinary competitions and advanced over a period of less than 30 years. In 1958, a manufacturer could fit 10 electronic components onto a single silicon chip. By 1970, it was possible to fit 100 units onto a chip of the same size, a tenfold increase in slightly more than a decade. But by 1972, it was possible to fit 1,000 units on a chip, and by 1974, 10,000 units. It was expected that by 1980, there would be 1 million units on a single chip the size of a thumbnail. But using electronic photo projection, this goal was actually realized in 1978. By the spring of 1979, the new goal was 10 million units, or even better, 1 billion units, on a single silicon chip by 1980. But nobody expected to wait past June or July of 1979 for this development. Such advances within an industry are unprecedented. Comparison to older manufacturing technologies makes this clear. Detroit was content to make trivial product design changes at 3-year intervals, but the electronics industry routinely expected order of magnitude advances in the same time to keep pace. Detroit would have had to increase automobile gas mileage from 8 miles per gallon in 1970 to 80 million miles per gallon in 1979. Instead, Detroit went from 8 to 16 miles per gallon. During that time, further evidence of the coming demise of the automotive industry as the center of the American economy. In such a competitive market, everyone worried about foreign powers, chiefly Japan, which since 1973 had maintained a Japanese cultural exchange in Santa Clara, actually a cover organization for blatant and well-financed industrial espionage. The blue contract could only be understood in the light of an industry making major advances every few months. Travis had said that the blue contract was the biggest thing we'll see in the next 10 years. Whoever finds those diamonds has a jump on the technology for at least 5 years. 5 years. Do you know what that means? Ross knew what it meant. In an industry where competitive edges were measured in months, companies had made fortunes by beating competitors by a matter of weeks, with some new techniques or device. Centel in California had been the first to make a 256K memory chip, while everyone else was still making 16K chips and dreaming of 64K chips. Centel kept their advantage for only 16 weeks, but realized a profit of more than $130 million. And we're talking about 5 years, Travis said. That's an advantage measured in billions of dollars, maybe tens of billions of dollars, if we can't get to those diamonds. These were the reasons for the extraordinary pressure Ross felt as she continued to work with the computer. At the age of 24, she was team leader in a high technology race involving a half-dozen nations around the globe, all secretly pitting their business and industrial resources against one another. The stakes made any conventional race seem ludicrous. Travis told her before she left, "Don't be afraid when the pressure makes you crazy. You have billions of dollars riding on your shoulders. Just do the best you can." Doing the best she could, she managed to reduce the expedition timeline by another 303 hours and 37 minutes. But they were still slightly behind the consortium projection. Not too far to make up the time, especially with Monroe's cold-blooded shortcuts. But nevertheless, behind, which could mean total disaster in a winner-take-all race. And then she received bad news. The screen printed, "Piggyback slurp. All bets off." "Hell," Ross said. She felt suddenly tired, because if there really had been a piggyback slurp, their chances of winning the race were vanishing before any of them had even set foot in the rainforests of Central Africa. 2. Piggyback slurp. Travis felt like a fool. He stared at the hard copy from Goddard Space Flight Center, Greenbelt, Maryland. "Ertz, why are you sending us all this mechanical data we don't really care? Thanks anyway. Desist at leisure." They had arrived an hour ago from GSFC, Maryland, but it was already too late by more than 5 hours. "Damn," Travis said, staring at the telex. The first indication to Travis that anything was wrong was when the Japanese and Germans broke off negotiations with Monroe in Tangier. 1 minute they had been willing to pay anything, the next minute they could hardly wait to leave. The break-off had come abruptly, discontinuously. It implied the sudden introduction of a new data into the consortium computer files. New data from where? There could be only one explanation, and now it was confirmed in the GSFC telex from Greenbelt. Earths, why are you sending all this Makenko data? There was a simple answer to that. Earth wasn't sending any data, at least not willingly. Earth and GSFC had an arrangement to exchange data updates. Travis had made that deal in 1978 to obtain cheaper satellite imagery. From orbiting Landsats, satellite imagery was his company's single greatest expense. In return for a look at derived Earth's data, GSFC agreed to supply satellite CCTs at 30% reduced gross cost. It seems like a good deal at the time, and the coded locks was specified in the agreement. But now the potential drawbacks loomed large before Travis. His worst fears were confirmed. Once you put a line over 2,000 miles from Houston to Greenbelt, you begged for a piggyback data slurp. Somewhere between Texas and Maryland, someone had inserted a terminal link-up, probably in the carrier telephone lines, and had begun to slurp out data on a piggyback terminal. This was the form of industrial espionage they most feared. A piggyback slurp terminal taped in between two legitimate terminals, monitoring the back and forth transmissions. After a time, the piggyback operator knew enough to begin making transmissions online, slurping out data from both ends, pretending to be GSFC to Houston and Houston to GSFC. The piggyback terminal could continue to function until one or both legitimate terminals realized that they were being slurped. Now the question was, how much data had been slurped out in the last 72 hours? He had called for 24-hour scanner checks, but they were disheartening. It looks as though the Earth's computer had yielded up not only original database elements, but also data transformation histories, the sequence of operations performed on the data by Earths over the last 4 weeks. If that was true, it meant that the Euro-Japanese consortium Piggyback knew what transformations Earths had carried out on the Makenko data, and therefore they knew where the lost city was located, with pinpoint accuracy. They now knew the location of the city as precisely as Ross did. Timelines had to be adjusted unfavorably to the Earth's team, and the updated computer projections were unequivocal. Ross or no Ross, the likelihood of the Earth's team reaching the site ahead of the Japanese and Germans was now almost nil. From Travis' viewpoint, the entire Earth's expedition was now a futile exercise in a waste of time. There was no hope of success. The only unfactorable element was the gorilla Amy and Travis' instincts. And Travis' instincts told him that a gorilla named Amy would not prove decisive in the discovery of mineral deposits in the northeastern Congo. It was hopeless. Should he recall the Earth's team? He stared at the console by his desk. Call cost time, he said. The computer blinked. Cost time available. Congo Field Survey, he said. The screen printed out numbers for the Congo Field Survey. Expenditures by the hour. Accumulated costs. Committed future costs. Cutoff points. Future branch point deletions. The project was now just outside Nairobi and was running at an accumulated cost of slightly over $189,000. Cancellation would cost $227,455. Factor BF, he said. The screen changed. BF. He now saw a series of probabilities. Factor BF was Bona Fortuna, good luck, the imponderable in all expeditions, especially remote, dangerous expeditions. Thinking a moment, the computer flashed. Travis rated. He knew that the computer would require several seconds to perform the computations to assign weights to random factors that might influence the expedition. Still 5 or more days from the target site. His beeper buzzed. Rogers, the tap dancer, said, "We've traced the piggyback slurp. It's in Norman, Oklahoma. Nominally at the North Central Insurance Corporations of America, NCIC, is 51% owned by a Hawaiian holding company, Hailekuri, Inc., which is in turn owned by mainland Japanese interests. What do you want?" "I want a very bad fire," Travis said. "Got you," Rogers said. He hung up the phone. The screen flashed. Assessed factor BF and a probability 449. He was surprised that figure meant that Earths had almost even chance of attaining the target site before the consortium. Travis didn't question the mathematics. .449 was good enough. The Earth's expedition would continue to the Congo, at least for the time being. And in the meantime, he would do whatever he could to slow down the consortium. Off the top of his head, Travis could think of 1 or 2 ideas to accomplish that. 3. Additional data. The jet was moving south over Lake Rudolph in northern Kenya. When Tom Siemens called Elliot, Siemens had finished his computer analysis to discriminate gorillas from other apes, principally chimpanzees. He had then obtained from Houston a videotape of 3 seconds of a garbled video transmission, which seemed to show a gorilla smashing a dish antenna and staring into a camera. "Well," Elliot said, looking at the computer screen. The data flashed up. Discriminate functions gorilla, chimp. Functional groupings distributed as gorilla 0.9934, chimp 0.1132. Test videotape Houston 0.3349. "Hell," Elliot said. "At those figures, the study was equivocal useless." "Sorry about that," Siemens said over the phone. "But part of the trouble comes from the test material itself. We had to factor in the computer derivation of that image. The image has been cleaned up, and that means it's been regularized, the critical stuff, has been lost. I'd like to work with the original digitized matrix. Can you get me that? Ken Ross was nodding yes. Sure, Elliot said. I'll go another round with it, Seaman said. But if you want my gut opinion, it is never going to turn out. The fact is that gorillas show a considerable individual variation in facial structure, just as people do. If we increase our sample base, we are going to get more variation in a larger population interval. I think you're stuck. You can never prove it's not a gorilla. But for my money, it's not. Meaning what? Elliot asked. It's something new, Seaman said. I'm telling you, if this was really a gorilla, it would have showed up 0.89 or 0.94. Somewhere in there. On this function, but the image comes out at 0.39. That's just not good enough. It's not a gorilla, Peter. Then what is it? It's a transitional form. I ran a function to measure where the variation was. You know what was the major differential? Skin color. Even in black and white, it's not dark enough to be a gorilla, Peter. This is a whole new animal. I promise you. Alicia looked at Ross. What does this do to your timeline? For the moment, nothing, she said. Other elements are more critical, and this is unfactorable. The pilot clicked on the intercom. We are beginning our descent into Nairobi, he said. 4. Nairobi. 5 miles outside Nairobi, one can find wild game of the East African savanna. And within the memory of many Nairobi residents, the game could be found closer still. Gazelles, buffalo, and giraffes, wandering around backyards, and the occasional leopard slipping into one's bedroom. In those days, the city still retained the character of a wild colonial station. In its heyday, Nairobi was a fast-living place indeed. Are you married, or do you live in Kenya? Went the standard question. The men were hard-drinking and rough, the women beautiful and loose, and the pattern of life no more predictable than the fox hunts that ranged over the rugged countryside each weekend. But modern Nairobi is almost unrecognizable from the time of those freewheeling colonial days. The few remaining Victorian buildings lie stranded in a modern city of 500,000 with traffic jams, stoplights, skyscrapers, supermarkets, same-day dry cleaners, French restaurants, and air pollution. The Earth's cargo plane landed at Nairobi International Airport at dawn on the morning of June 16th, and Monroe contacted porters and assistants for the expedition. They intended to leave Nairobi within 2 hours until Travis calls from Houston to inform them that Peterson, one of the geologists on the first Congo expedition, had somehow made it back to Nairobi. Ross was excited by the news. Where is he now? She asked. At the morgue, Travis said. Elliot winced as he came close. The body of the stainless steel table was a blond man his own age. The man's arms had been crushed, the skin was swollen, a ghastly purple color. He glanced at Ross, She seemed perfectly cool, not blinking or turning away. The pathologist stepped on a foot pedal, activating a microphone overhead. Would you state your name, please? Karen Ellen Ross. Your nationality and passport numbered. American F 1413649. Can you identify the man before you, Miss Ross? Yes, she said. He is James Robert Peterson. What is your relation to the deceased James Robert Peterson? I worked with him, she said dully. She seemed to be examining a geological specimen, scrutinizing it unemotionally. Her face showed no reaction as James. Her face showed no reaction. The pathologist faced the microphone. Identity confirmed as James Robert Peterson. Male, Caucasian, 29 years old. Nationality, American. He turned back to Ross. When was the last time you saw Mr. Peterson? In May of this year. He was leaving for the Congo. You have not seen him in the last month? No, she said. What happened? The pathologist touched the puffy purple injuries on his arms. His fingertips sank in, leaving indentations like teeth in the flesh. Damn strange story, the pathologist said. The previous day, June 15th, Peterson had been flown to Nairobi Airport aboard a small charter cargo plane in end-stage terminal shock. He died several hours later without regaining consciousness. Extraordinary. He made it at all. Apparently, the aircraft made an unscheduled stop for a mechanical problem at Garona Field, a dirt track in Zaire. And then this fellow comes stumbling out of the woods, collapsing at their feet. The pathologist pointed out that the bones had been shattered in both arms. The injuries, he explained, were not new. They had occurred at least 4 days earlier, perhaps more. He must have been in incredible pain, Elliot said. What could cause that injury? The pathologist had never seen anything like it. Superficially, it resembles mechanical trauma, a crushed injury from an automobile or truck. We see a good deal of those here. But mechanical crush injuries are not bilateral, as they are in this case. So it wasn't a mechanical injury? Ken Ross asked. Don't know what it was. It's unique. In my experience, the pathologist said briskly, we also found traces of blood under his nails, and a few strands of gray hair. We are running a test now. Across the room, another pathologist looked up from his microscope. The hair is definitely not human. Cross-section doesn't match. Some kind of animal hair, close to human. The cross-section, Ross said. Best index we have of hair origin, the pathologist said. For instance, human pubic hair is more elliptical in cross-section than other body hair, or facial hair. It's quite characteristic and admissible in court, but especially in the laboratory. We come across a great deal of animal hair, and rare experts in that as well. A large stainless steel analyzer began pinging. Blood's coming through, the pathologist said. On a video screen, they saw twin patterns of pastel-colored streaks. This is the electrophoresis pattern, the pathologist explained, to check serum proteins. That's ordinary human blood on the left. On the right we have the blood sample from under the nails. You can see it's definitely not human blood. Not human blood? Ross said, glancing at Elliot. It's close to human blood, the pathologist said, staring at the pattern, but it's not human. Could be a domestic or farm animal, a pig, perhaps, or else a primate. Monkeys and apes are very close serologically to human beings. We'll have a computer analysis in a minute. On the screen, the computer printed alpha and beta serum globulins match gorilla blood. The pathologist said, "There's your answer to what he had under his nails, gorilla's blood." 5. Examination. "She won't hurt you," Elliot told the frightened orderly. They were in the passenger compartment of the 747 cargo jet. "See, she's smiling at you." Amy was indeed giving her most winning smile, being careful not to expose her teeth. But the orderly from the private clinic in Nairobi was not familiar with these fine points of gorilla etiquette. His hands shook as he held the syringe. Nairobi was the last opportunity for Amy to receive a thorough checkup. Her large, powerful body belayed a constitutional fragility, as her heavy-browed, glowing face belied a meek, rather tender nature. In San Francisco, the Project Amy staff subjected her to a thorough medical regimen. Urine samples every other day, stool samples checked weekly for occult blood, complete blood studies monthly, and a trip to the dentist every 3 months for removal of the black tartar that accumulated from her vegetarian diet. Amy took it all in stride, but the terrified orderly did not know that. He approached her holding the syringe in front of him like a weapon. "You sure he won't bite?" Amy, trying to be helpful, signed, "Amy promises no bite." She was signing slowly, deliberately, as she always did when confronted by someone who did not know her language. "She promises not to bite you," Elliot said. "So you say," the orderly said. Elliot did not bother to explain that he hadn't said it, she had. After the blood samples were drawn, the orderly relaxed a little. Packing up, he said, Certainly is an ugly brute." "You've hurt her feelings," Elliot said. And indeed, Amy was signing vigorously. "What ugly? Nothing, Amy," Elliot said. "He's just never seen a gorilla before." The orderly said, "I beg your pardon. You've hurt her feelings. You'd better apologize." The orderly snapped his medical case shut. He stared at Elliot and then at Amy. "Apologize to him?" "Her," Elliot said. "Yes. How would you like to be told you're ugly?" Elliot felt strongly about this. Over the years, he had come to feel acutely the prejudices that human beings show toward apes, considering chimpanzees to be cute children, orangs to be wise old men, and gorillas to be hulking, dangerous brutes. They were wrong in every case. Each of these animals was unique. It did not fit the human stereotypes at all. Chimps, for example, were much more callous than gorillas ever were. Because chimps were extroverts, an angry chimp was far more dangerous than an angry gorilla at the zoo. Elliot would watch in amazement as human mothers pushed their children closer to look at the chimps, but recoiled protectively at the sight of the gorillas. These mothers obviously did not know that wild chimpanzees caught and ate human infants, something gorillas never did. Elliot had witnessed repeatedly the human prejudice against gorillas. It had come to recognize its effect on Amy. Amy could not help the fact that she was huge and black and heavy-browed and squash-faced. Behind the face people considered so repulsive was an intelligent and sensitive consciousness, sympathetic to the people around her. It pained her when people ran away, or screamed in fear, or made her cruel remarks. The orderly frowned. You mean that he understands English? Yes, she does. The gender change was something else Elliot didn't like. People who were afraid of Amy always assumed she was male. The orderly shook his head. I don't believe it. Amy showed the man to the door. Amy lumbered over to the door and opened it for the orderly, whose eyes widened as he left. Amy closed the door behind him. Silly human man, Amy sighed. Never mind, Elliot said. Come, Peter tickled Amy. And for the next 15 minutes, he tickled her as she rolled on the floor and grunted in deep satisfaction. Elliot never noticed the door opened behind him, never noticed the shadow falling across the floor until it was too late, and he turned his head to look up and saw the dark cylinder swing down, and his head erupted with blinding white pain, and everything went black. 6. Kidnapped. He awoke to a piercing electronic shriek. Don't move, sir, a voice said. Elliot opened his eyes and stared into a bright light shining down on him. He was still lying on his back in the aircraft. Someone was bent over him, looking to the right. Now to the left. Can you flex your fingers? He followed the instructions. The light was taken away, and he saw a black man in the white suit crouched beside him. The man touched Elliot's head. His fingers came away, red with blood. Nothing to be alarmed about, the man said. It's quite superficial. He looked off. How long would you estimate he was unconscious? Couple of minutes, no more, Monroe said. The high-pitched squeal came again. He saw Ross moving around the passenger section, wearing a shoulder pack and holding a wand in front of her. There was another squeal. Damned, he said, and plucked something from the molding around the window. That's 5. They really did a job. Monroe looked down at Elliot. How do you feel? He asked. He should be put under observation for 24 hours, the black man said, just as a precaution. 24 hours, Ross said, moving around the compartment. Elliot said, Where is she? They took her, Monroe said. They opened the rear door, inflated the pneumatic slide, and were gone before anyone realized what happened. We found this next to you. Monroe gave him a small glass vial with Japanese markings. The sides of the vial were scratched and scored at one end, was a rubber plunger. In the other end, a broken needle. Elliot sat up. Easy there, the doctor said. I feel fine, Elliot said, although his head was throbbing. He turned the vial over in his hand. There was frost on it. When you found it? Monroe nodded. Very cold. CO2, Elliot said. It was a dart from a gas gun. He shook his head. They broke the needle off in her. He could imagine Amy's screams of outrage. She was unaccustomed to anything but the tenderest treatment. Perhaps that was one of the shortcomings of his work with her. He had not prepared her well enough for the real world. He sniffed the vial, smelled a pungent odor. Labaxin, fast-acting, soporific onset within 15 seconds. It's what they'd use. Elliot was angry. Labaxin was not often used on animals because it caused liver damage, and they had broken the needle. He got to his feet and leaned on Monroe, who put his arms around him. The doctor protested. I'm fine, Elliot said. Across the room, there was another squeal, this one loud and prolonged. Ross was moving around over the medicine cabinet, past the bottles of pills and supplies. The sound seemed to embarrass her. Quickly she moved away, shutting the cabinet. She crossed the passenger compartment, and a squeal was heard again. Ross removed a small black device from the underside of one seat. Look at this. They must have brought an extra person just to plant the bugs. It'll take hours to sterilize the plane. We can't wait. She went immediately to the computer console and began typing. Elliot said, Where are they now? The consortium. The main party left from Kubala Airport outside Nairobi 6 hours ago, Monroe said. Then they didn't take Amy with them. Of course they didn't take her, Ross said, sounding annoyed. They've got no use for her. Have they killed her? Elliot asked. Maybe, Monroe said quietly. Oh, Jesus. But I doubt it, Monroe continued. They don't want any publicity, and Amy's famous as famous in some circles as an ambassador or a head of state. She's a talking gorilla, and there aren't many of those. She's been on television news. She's had a picture in the newspapers. They'd kill you before they kill her. Just so they don't kill her, Elliot said. They won't, Ross said with finality. The consortium isn't interested in Amy. They don't even know why we brought her. They're just trying to blow our timeline, but they won't succeed. Something in her tone suggested that she planned to leave Amy behind. The idea appalled Elliot. We've got to get her back, he said. Amy is my responsibility. I can't possibly abandon her here. 72 minutes, Ross said, pointing to the screen. We have exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes before we blow the timeline. She turned to Monroe. And we have to switch over to the second contingency. Fine, Monroe said. I'll get the men working on it. In a new plane, Ross said, we can't take this one. It's contaminated. She was punching in call letters to the computer console, her fingers clicking on the buttons. We'll take it straight to point M, Ross said. Okay. Absolutely, Monroe said. Elliot said, I won't leave Amy. If you're going to leave her behind, you'll have to leave me as well. Elliot stopped. Printed on the screen was the message from was the message. Forget gorilla. Proceed to next checkpoint. Urgent. Ape not significant. Timeline outcome. Computer verification. Repeat. Proceed without Amy. You can't leave her behind, Elliot said. I'll stay behind too. Let me tell you something, Ross said. I never believed that Amy was important to this expedition. Or you either. From the very beginning, she was just a diversion. When I came to San Francisco, I was followed. You and Amy provided a diversion. You threw the consortium into a spin. It was worth it. Now it's not worth it. We'll leave you both behind if we have to. I couldn't care less. 7. Bugs. Well, God damn it, Elliot began. Do you mean to tell me that? That's right, Ross said coldly. You're expendable. But even as she spoke, she grabbed his arm firmly and led him out of the airplane, while she held her finger to her lips. Elliot realized that she intended to pacify him in private. Amy was his responsibility, and to hell with all the diamonds. An international intrigue. Outside on the concrete runway, he repeated stubbornly, I'm not leaving without Amy. Neither am I, Ross walked quickly across the runway toward a police helicopter. Elliot hurried to catch up. What? Don't you understand anything, Ross said. That airplane's not clean. It's full of bugs. And the consortium's listening in. I made that speech for their benefit. But who was following you in San Francisco? Nobody. They are going to spend hours trying to figure out who was. Amy and I weren't just a diversion. Not at all, she said. Look, we don't know what happened to the latest Earth's Congo team. But no matter what you or Travis or anyone else says, I think gorillas were involved. And I think that Amy will help us when we get there, as an ambassador. We need information, Ross said. And she knows more about gorillas than we do. But can you find her in an hour and 10 minutes? Hell no, Ross said, checking her watch. This won't take more than 20 minutes. Lower, lower, Ross was shouting into her radio headset as she sat alongside the police helicopter pilot. The helicopter was circling the tower of Government House, turning and moving north toward the Hilton. This is not acceptable, madame, the pilot said politely. We fly below airspace limitations. You're too damn high, Ross said. She was looking at a box on her knees, with four compass pointed digital readouts. She flicked switches quickly, while the radio crackled with angry complaints from Nairobi Tower. East now, due east, she instructed, and the helicopter tilted and moved east toward the poor outskirts of the city. In the back, Elliot felt his stomach twist with each banking turn of the helicopter. His head pounded, and he felt awful, but he had insisted on coming. He was the only person knowledgeable enough to minister to Amy if she was in medical trouble. Now, sitting alongside the pilot, Ross said, "Get a reading?" And she pointed to the northeast. The helicopter thumped over crude shacks, junked automobile lots, dirt roads slower now, slower. The readouts glowed, the numbers shifting. Elliot saw them all go to zero simultaneously. Down, Ross shouted. and the helicopter descended in the center of a vast garbage dump. The pilot remained with the helicopter. His final words were disquieting. "Where there's garbage, there's rats," he said. "Rats don't bother me," Ross said, climbing out with her, box in her hand. "Where there's rats, there's cobras," the pilot said. "Oh," Ross said. She crossed the dump with Elliot. There was a stiff breeze. Papers and debris ruffled at their feet. Elliot's head ached, and the odors arising from the dump nauseated him. "Not far now," Ross said, washing the box. She was excited, glancing at her watch. "Here." She bent over and picked through the trash, her hand making circles, digging deeper in frustration, elbow deep in the trash. Finally, she came up with a necklace she had given Amy when they first boarded the airplane in San Francisco. She turned it over, examining the plastic name tag on it, which Elliot noticed was unusually thick. There was fresh scratches on the back. "Hell," Ross said. 16 minutes shot. And she hurried back to the waiting helicopter. Elliot fell into step beside her. "But how can you find her if they got rid of her necklace bug?" "Nobody," Ross said. Plants only one bug. This was just a decoy. They were supposed to find it." She pointed to the scratches on the back. "But they're clever. They reset the frequencies." "Maybe they got rid of the second bug too," Elliot said. "They didn't," Ross said. The helicopter lifted off, a thudding whir of blades, and the paper and trash of the dump swirled in circles beneath them. She pressed her mouthpiece to her lips and said to the pilot, "Take me to the largest scrap metal source in Nairobi." Within 9 minutes, they had picked up another very weak signal, located within an automobile junkyard. The helicopter landed in the street outside, throwing dozens of shouting children. Ross went with Elliot into the junkyard, moving past the rustling hulks of cars and trucks. "You're sure she's here?" Elliot said. "No question. They have to surround her with metal. It's the only thing they can do. Why? Shielding." She picked her way around the broken cars, pausing frequently to refer to her electronic box. Then Elliot heard a grunt. It came from inside an ancient rust-red Mercedes bus. Elliot climbed through the shattered doors, the rubber gaskets trembling in his hands. Into the interior, he found Amy on her back, tied with adhesive tape. She was groggy but complained loudly. When he tore the tape off her hair, he located the broken needle in her right chest and plucked it out with forceps. Amy shrieked, then hugged him. He heard the far-off whine of a police siren. "It's all right, Amy. It's all right," he said. He set her down and examined her more carefully. She seemed to be okay. And then he said, "Where's the second bug?" Ross grinned. She swallowed it. Now that Amy was safe, Elliot felt a rave of anger. "You made her swallow it? An electronic bug? Don't you realize that she is a very delicate animal, and her health is extremely precarious?" "Don't get worked up," Ross said. "Remember the vitamins I gave you?" "You swallowed one too." She glanced at her watch. 32 minutes, she said. Not bad at all. We have 40 minutes before we have to leave Nairobi. 8. Present point. Monroe sat in the 747, punching buttons on the computer. He watched as the lines crisscrossed over the maps, ticking out data lines, timelines, information lock, coordinates. The computer ran through possible expeditions routines, quickly testing a new one every 10 seconds. After each data fit, outcomes were printed. Cost, logistical difficulties, supply problems, total elapsed times from Houston, from present point Nairobi, where they were now, looking for a solution. It wasn't like the old days, Monroe thought. Even 5 years ago, expeditions were still run on guesswork and luck. But now every expedition employed real-time computer planning. Monroe had long since been forced to learn BASIC and TW-Geschund and other major interactive languages. Nobody did it by the seat of the pants anymore. The business had changed. Monroe had decided to join the Earth's expedition precisely because of those changes. Certainly, he hadn't joined because of Ken Ross, who was stubborn and inexperienced, but Earth had the most elaborate working database and the most sophisticated planning programs. In the long run, he expected those programs to make the crucial difference. And he liked a smaller team. Once the consortium was in the field, the working party of 30 was going to prove unwieldy. But he had to find a faster timeline to get them in. Monroe pressed the buttons, watching the data flash up. He set trajectories, intersections, junctions. Then, with a practical eye, he began to eliminate alternatives. He closed out pathways, shut down airfields, eliminated truck routes, avoided river crossings. The computer kept coming back with reduced times, but from present point Nairobi, the total elapsed times were always too long. The best projection beat the consortium by 37 minutes, which was nothing to rely on. He frowned and smoked a cigar. Perhaps if he crossed the Liko River at Mugana. He punched the buttons. It didn't help. Crossing the Liko was slower. He tried trekking through the Garuba Valley, even though it was probably too hazardous to execute. Proposed routing excessively hazardous. Great minds think alike, Monroe said, smoking his cigar. But it started him wondering. Were there others unorthodox approaches they had overlooked? And then he had an idea. The others wouldn't like it, but it might work. Monroe called the logistics equipment list. Yes, they were equipped for it. He punched in the routing, smiling as he saw the line streak straight across Africa. Within a few miles of their destination, he called for outcomes. Proposed routing unacceptable. He pressed the override button. Got the data outcomes anyway. It was just as he thought. They could beat the consortium by a full 40 hours, nearly 2 full days. The computer went back to the previous statement. Proposed routing unacceptable. Altitude factors, hazards to personnel, excessive, probability success under limits. Monroe didn't think that didn't think that was true. He thought they could pull it off, especially if the weather was good. The altitude wouldn't be a problem, and the ground, although rough, would be reasonably yielding. In fact, the more Monroe thought about it, the more certain he was that it would work. 9. Departure. The little Fokker's S-144 prop plane was pulled up alongside the giant 747 cargo jet, like an infant nursing at its mother's breast. 2 cargo ramps were in constant motion as men transferred equipment from the larger plane to the smaller one. Returning to the airfield, Ross explained to Elliot that they would be taking the smaller plane since the 747 had to be debugged, and since it was too large for their needs now. But the jet must be faster, Elliot said. Not necessarily, Ross said, but she did not explain further. In any case, things were now happening very fast, and Elliot had other concerns. He helped Amy aboard the Fokker and checked her thoroughly. She seemed to be bruised all over her body. At least she complained that everything hurt when he touched her. But she had no broken bones, and she was in good spirits. Several black men were loading equipment into the airplane, laughing and slapping each other on the back, having a fine time. Amy was intrigued with the men, demanding to know what joke. But they ignored her, concentrating on the work at hand, and she was still groggy from her medication. Soon she fell asleep. Ross supervised the loading, and Elliot moved toward the rear of the plane, where she was talking with the jolly black man, whom she introduced as Kariga. Ah, Kariga said, shaking Elliot's hand. Dr. Elliot, Dr. Ross, and Dr. Elliot. 2 doctors, very excellent. Elliot was not sure why it was excellent. Kahiga laughed infectiously. Very good, clever. He announced, not like the old days with Captain Monroe. Now, 2 doctors, a medical mission, yes? Very excellent. Where are the medical supplies? He cocked an eyebrow. We have no medical supplies, Ross sighed. Oh, very excellent, doctor. I like your manner, Kariga said. You are American, yes? We take with M16s. Very good rifle. M16, I prefer it myself. Kahiga thinks we are running guns, Ross said. He just can't believe we aren't. Kahiga was laughing. You are with Captain Monroe, he said, as if this explained everything. And then he went off to see about the other workmen. You sure we aren't running guns? Elliot asked, when they were alone. We're after something more valuable than guns, Ross said. She was repacking the equipment, working quickly. Elliot asked if he could help, but she shook her head. I've got to do this myself. We have to get it down to 40 pounds per person. 40 pounds for everything? That's what the computer projections allows, Monroe's brought in Kaiga's and 7 other Kikura's assistants. With the 3 of us, that makes 11 people altogether, plus Amy. She gets her full 40 pounds, but it means a total of 480 pounds. Ross continued to weigh packs and parcels of food. The news gave Elliot serious misgivings. The expedition was taking yet another turn into still greater danger. His immediate desire to go back out was checked by his memory of the video screen, and the gray gorilla-like creature that he suspected was a new unknown animal. That was a discovery worth risk. He stared out the window at the porters. They're Kikiru? Yes, she said. They're good porters. Even if they never shut up. Kikiyu tribesmen love to talk. They're all brothers, by the way, so be careful what you say. I just hope Monroe didn't have to tell them too much. The Kikirus? No, the NCNA. The NCNA, Elliot repeated. The Chinese are very interested in computers and electronic technology, Ross said. Monroe must be telling them something in exchange for the advice they're giving him. She gestured to the window, and Elliot looked out. Sure enough, Monroe stood under the shadow of the 747 ring, talking with 4 Chinese men. Here, Ross said, stow these in that corner. She pointed to 3 large styrofoam cartons, marked American, sport divers, Lake Elsinore, Calif. We're doing underwater work, Elliot asked, puzzled. But Ross wasn't paying attention. I just wish I knew what he was telling them, she said. But as it turned out, Ross needed to have worried. For Monroe paid the Chinese in something more valuable to them than electronics information. The fucker lifted off from the Nairobi runway at 14:24 hours, 3 minutes ahead of their new timeline schedule. During the 16 hours following Amy's recovery, the Earth's expedition traveled 560 miles across the borders of 4 countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Zaire. As they went from Nairobi to the Barana forest, at the edge of the Congo rainforest, the logistics of the complex move would have been impossible without the assistance of an outside ally. Monroe said that he had friends in low places, and in this case, he had turned to the Chinese Secret Service in Tanzania. The Chinese had been active in Africa since the early 1960s, when their spy networks attempted to influence the course of the Congolese Civil War, because China wanted access to the Congo's rich supplies of uranium. Field operatives were one out of the Bank of China or more. More commonly, the New China News Agency. Monroe had dealt with a number of NCNA war correspondents when he was running arms from 1963 to 1968, and he had never lost his contacts. The Chinese financial commitment to Africa was considerable in the late 1960s. More than half of China's $2 billion in foreign aid went to African nations. An equal sum was spent secretly in 1973. Mao Zedong complained publicly about the money he had wasted trying to overthrow the Zaire government of President Mobutu. The Chinese mission in Africa was meant to counter the Russian influence, but since World War II, the Chinese bore no great love for the Japanese, and Monroe's desire to beat the Euro-Japanese consortiums fell on sympathetic ears. To celebrate their alliance, Monroe had brought 3 grease-stained cardboard cartons from Hong Kong. The 2 chief Chinese operatives in Africa, Li Tiao and Liu Shuren, were both from Human Province. They found their African postings tedious because of the bland African food, and gratefully accepted Monroe's gift of a case of tree ears fungus, a case of hot bean sauce, and a case of chili paste with garlic. The fact that these spices came from neutral Hong Kong and were not the inferior condiments produced in Taiwan was a subtle point. In any case, the gift struck exactly the proper note for an informal exchange. And CNA operatives assisted Monroe with paperwork, some difficult to obtain equipment, and information. The Chinese possessed excellent maps and remarkably detailed information about conditions along the northeast Zaire border, since they were assisting the Tanzanian troops invading Uganda. The Chinese had told him that the jungle rivers were flooding, and had advised him to procure a balloon for crossings, but Monroe did not bother to take their advice. Indeed, he seemed to have some plan to reach his destination without crossing any rivers at all. Although how, the Chinese could not imagine. At 10 p.m. on June 16th, the Fokker stopped to refuel at Waramengina Airport, outside Kigali in Rwanda. The local traffic control officer boarded the plane with a clipboard and forms, asking their next destination. Monroe said that it was Waramengina Airport, meaning that the aircraft would make a loop then return. Elliot frowned. "But we're going to land somewhere in the shh," Walsh said, shaking her head. "Leave it alone." Certainly, the traffic officer seemed content with this flight plan. Once the pilot signed the clipboard, he departed. Walsh explained that flight controllers in Rwanda were accustomed to aircraft that did not file full plans. He just wants to know when the plane will be back at his field. The rest is none of his business. Waramegana Airport was sleepy. They had to wait 2 hours for patrol to be brought, yet the normally impatient Ross waited quietly, and Monroe dozed, equally indifferent to the delay. "What about the timeline?" Elliot asked. "No problem," she said. "We can't leave for 3 hours, anyway. We need the light over Makenko." "That's where the airfield is," Elliot asked. "If you call it an airfield," Monroe said, and he pulled his safari hat down over his eyes and went back to sleep. This worried Elliot until Ross explained to him that most outlying African airfields were just dirt strips cut into the bush. The pilots couldn't land at night or in the foggy morning, because there were often animals on the field, or encamped nomads, or another plane that had put down and was unable to take off again. "We need the light," she explained. "That's why we're waiting. Don't worry, it's all factored in." Elliot accepted her explanation and went back to check on Amy. Ross sighed. "Don't you think we'd better tell him?" she asked. "Why?" Monroe said, not lifting his hat. "Maybe there's a problem with Amy." "I'll take care of Amy," Monroe said. "It's going to upset Elliot when he finds out," Ross said. "Of course it's going to upset him," Monroe said. "But there's no point upsetting him until we have to. After all, what's this jump worth to us?" 40 hours at least. "It's dangerous, but it'll give us a whole new timeline. We could still beat them." "Well, there's your answer," Monroe said. "Now keep your mouth shut and get some rest."